I am Harrison, 34 years old. 8 months ago, I stood in a tailored tuxedo and watched my own father give away the multi-million-dollar business I built with my own bare hands. While I was standing at my younger brother's lavish wedding reception, holding a glass of expensive champagne prepared to toast his new life, my parents pulled me aside into a private stone patio. Without a shred of hesitation, they handed the entire company over to my lazy, entitled brother. My dad looked me dead in the eye and said, "You are solid, Harrison. You don't need a hand up. Julian needs an anchor." They smiled. They patted his back, celebrating their golden child, while I stood there, completely stripped of my life's work and my rightful inheritance in front of his smug new wife and a crowd of wealthy strangers just on the other side of the glass. But there is one massive thing they did not know. They did not know I never signed a single employment contract, a non-disclosure agreement, or a non-compete clause with the family business. I legally owned my own proprietary designs. And now, my brother is drowning in massive corporate debt, facing a potential lawsuit that will ruin him, and my father is leaving me pathetic voicemails, sobbing and begging for my forgiveness. Before I tell you exactly what happened and how I took back absolute control of my life, hit the like button if you believe in true justice. And do not forget to let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Now, let's go back to where this nightmare actually started. I was sitting in the cold cab of my Ford F-150, parked outside a sprawling, drafty industrial warehouse on the grimier edge of town. It was late Tuesday evening. The engine was off, the heater was dead, and the only light came from the dashboard gauges and the harsh, blue glare of my smartphone screen resting in the cup holder. The rain was beating rhythmically against the windshield. On the screen was a single voicemail notification from a contact simply saved as Victor, my father. I hit play. For the first 3 solid minutes, there were no actual words. Just the heavy, broken, pathetic sound of a grown man sobbing uncontrollably. It was not a quiet, dignified sniffle. It was the deep, chest-heaving, agonizing weeping of someone whose entire manufactured reality had just collapsed around them. This was a man who had never shown an ounce of emotional vulnerability in his entire life. A man who measured a person's worth by how much physical labor they could endure without complaining. A man who thought emotions were a sign of a weak character and poor discipline. And here he was, gasping for air on a digital recording, completely falling apart into a million pieces. I sat there in the cold, suffocating silence of my truck. A half-empty cup of black gas station coffee was turning ice-cold next to my phone. I just listened. My hands rested heavily on the steering wheel, the thick calluses on my palms rubbing against the worn leather. I felt absolutely nothing. No pity. No sudden, overwhelming urge to call him back and tell him everything was going to be okay. No desire to offer him a lifeline. Just a profound, heavy, dark emptiness. To understand why a father's agonizing tears made me feel absolutely nothing, you have to understand the blood, sweat, torn muscles, and mountains of sawdust I gave to that man for nearly a decade of my youth. For 8 grueling years, I woke up at 4:30 in the morning, every single day, including most weekends. I would drive through the quiet, dark streets of our town before the sun even thought about coming up, unlocking the heavy corrugated metal doors of Victor's custom cabinetry. I loved that shop. I loved the sharp, earthy scent of fresh-cut red oak, maple, and premium walnut. I loved the deafening, bone-rattling roar of the industrial table saws kicking on, the high-pitched whine of the CNC routers, the deep satisfaction of turning a raw, ugly stack of lumber into something beautiful and functional that a family would use every single day in their kitchen. When I started working there full-time right out of high school, the shop was barely surviving. It was pulling in a modest, barely livable salary for my dad and maybe 2 part-time, unreliable guys who showed up whenever they felt like it. It was a glorified garage hobby dressed up as a legitimate business. But I saw the raw potential. I did not just want to build basic cabinets for local tract homes. I wanted to build an empire. By the time I was 25, I had completely overhauled our entire production line. I taught myself supply chain logistics late at night. I managed the complex payroll. I negotiated drastically better rates with our lumber suppliers by driving hundreds of miles across state lines to meet them face-to-face and demand better terms. I even sat down with financial advisors and set up a 401k matching program to retain our best craftsmen, because I knew that you cannot build luxury, high-ticket items with a revolving door of cheap, unskilled labor. I expanded our operations into full-scale luxury kitchen remodeling, dealing directly with snobby interior designers and high-end architects who demanded perfection. We went from scraping by on small residential repair jobs to pulling in over $1 million in yearly revenue. I was the engine of that growth. I was working 60 to 70 hours a week. My hands were permanently scarred from slipped chisels. My back constantly ached from lifting 100-pound sheets of MDF, and I completely missed out on most of my 20s. While guys my age were at bars, traveling the world, or dating, I was sitting in a dusty office staring at massive spreadsheets and CAD designs until my eyes practically bled. But I did not care. I really did not. I was building our family legacy. I believed, with every fiber of my being, that my father and I were partners in this grand endeavor. I thought my sweat was pouring the concrete foundation for a massive home we would all share, a financial legacy that would outlast both of us and provide for future generations. I was so incredibly wrong. I was just the hired help, grinding my bones into dust, building a massive mansion for someone else to live in. And the person who was going to take the keys to that mansion had never even held a hammer in his entire life. I thought the worst was over when I realized my place in the family. I was so incredibly wrong. There is an old, bitter saying that every family has a workhorse and a show pony. I was the workhorse. My younger brother, Julian, was the show pony, and my parents were the adoring audience throwing roses at his feet. Julian is exactly 3 years younger than me, and from the absolute moment he could form full sentences, he knew exactly how to charm his way out of any responsibility. While I was out in the freezing garage learning how to read complex architectural blueprints, measuring microscopic joint tolerances, and sweeping up mountains of sawdust just to earn my allowance, Julian was inside the air-conditioned house. He would sit on the couch, flashing a brilliant smile, convincing our mother, Sylvia, to do his middle school history projects because he was just so overwhelmed. He was the undisputed golden child. The rules of reality simply did not apply to him. He went to a ridiculously expensive private university on a massive college fund that my parents entirely drained their retirement savings to pay for. I, on the other hand, went straight into the family dust storm right after high school to ensure there was actually food on the table and the mortgage was paid. Julian bounced aimlessly from major to major: political science, art history, business management, finally graduating after 5.5 years with a completely generic, useless communications degree. After college, his career path was an absolute joke. He tried selling life insurance, but quit after 3 weeks because he hated cold calling and claimed the office fluorescent lighting gave him severe migraines. He took real estate courses, bragging loudly at every family gathering about how much money he was going to make flipping luxury houses. But he failed the state licensing exam twice because he flat out refused to study the material. He lived in a luxury apartment downtown, entirely subsidized by my parents. He drove a brand new imported SUV that they paid the lease on every single month. Every Thanksgiving dinner at my parents' house was the exact same exhausting, soul-crushing script. We would all sit around the large dining table that I had custom-built from reclaimed mahogany. The turkey would be carved, the expensive wine poured. Julian would inevitably show up 30 minutes late, dressed in a tailored blazer and Italian loafers, acting like he had just flown in from a high-stakes board meeting in New York. He would sit down and immediately start talking about his latest million-dollar idea, an app that was going to revolutionize the fitness industry, a startup consulting firm, a revolutionary marketing agency. It was always vaporware, nothing real. Nothing that actually produced a single dollar of actual salary. But my mother would stare at him with absolute, unwavering adoration. She would hang onto his every single word like he was a visionary genius about to change the world. Then, after Julian finished his grand monologue, Sylvia would turn her gaze to me. I would be sitting there, utterly exhausted from a 14-hour shift trying to finish a massive commercial contract before the holiday deadline, sawdust probably still clinging to the collar of my flannel shirt. Sylvia would give me this tight, pitying, condescending smile. "Harrison, honey," she would say, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "It is so nice that you are helping your father out in the shop. It really takes a load off his shoulders. Maybe one day you will find a real career path like your brother. Something with a reliable salary and benefits. Something you can be proud of." Helping my father out. I was running the entire company. I was managing 20 grown men. I was the one bringing in the massive revenue that paid for Julian's downtown apartment and his car lease. But to my mother, I was just a manual laborer, a mindless grunt who did not have the brains to do anything else. And my father? Victor would just stare at his mashed potatoes, chewing slowly, and say absolutely nothing. He never corrected her. He never validated my work. He let her belittle me because it was infinitely easier than facing the harsh truth about his precious, useless youngest son. I swallowed the bitterness year after agonizing year. I told myself that the work would speak for itself. I believed in the tangible world. A perfectly leveled granite countertop, a seamlessly joined cabinet door, a corporate balance sheet completely in the green. These were hard facts. They could not be argued with. I thought that eventually Victor would look at the massive empire I had built and acknowledge that I was his true, rightful successor. The real shift, the absolute beginning of the end, happened when Julian met Harper. Harper came from a very wealthy, deeply toxic family. Her parents had gone through a vicious, highly publicized divorce a few years prior. They spent years dragging each other through the mud, fighting over millions in commercial real estate portfolios, and engaging in a brutal, emotionally scarring custody battle over Harper's younger teenage siblings. Because of this chaotic upbringing, Harper was ruthless, obsessed with outward status, and determined to maintain a high society lifestyle at all costs. She wore designer clothes, carried handbags that cost more than my first truck, and looked at people in the service industry like they were stray dogs. She was banking on a massive inheritance, but until then, she needed someone to fund her life. Julian was utterly terrified of losing her. He knew his part-time gig as a freelance marketing consultant, which generated exactly $0 in actual income, was not going to cut it for a woman who expected weekend ski trips to Aspen and front-row tickets to everything. Suddenly, out of nowhere, Julian started taking an intense, highly suspicious interest in the family business. It started about 8 months before his wedding. Julian would show up at the shop on a Tuesday afternoon, wearing spotless designer khakis and a crisp button-down shirt. He would walk the production floor like a visiting dignitary touring a third-world country, sipping an iced coffee, asking painfully basic questions about the machinery that a first-day apprentice would know the answer to. My father absolutely ate it up. Victor would practically trip over his own feet to show Julian around. He would stop active production just to introduce Julian to our high-end clients or visiting architects, slapping him on the back with a massive, proud grin. "This is my youngest, Julian," Victor would say proudly. "Sharp kid. He is going to bring this company into the modern age. Going to handle the big-picture executive stuff." I watched this humiliating circus from the back of the shop, covered in toxic wood glue and sweat, holding a heavy pneumatic nail gun. My stomach churned with dread. I tried to talk to Victor about it one evening in the cramped office after the crew had gone home. I laid out the financial ledgers. I asked him what exactly Julian's role was going to be, because we absolutely could not afford a bloated executive salary for a guy who did not know the difference between premium plywood and cheap particle board. Victor got instantly defensive. His face flushed a deep red. He crossed his arms aggressively, and his jaw tightened. "He is your brother, Harrison," Victor snapped loudly. "He is getting married. He is putting down roots. I am giving him a promotion into the executive side of things. You handle the manual labor, he handles the vision. It is a family business, and we take care of our own." Promotion. To a job that did not physically exist, for a company he had never worked a single hard day for. I should have seen the writing on the wall right then and there. I should have packed up my expensive tools, called a lawyer, and walked out into the night. But I was foolishly, stubbornly loyal. I thought I could manage Julian. I thought I could keep him isolated in a glass office, let him play fake CEO on Instagram, give him a meaningless corporate title to keep Harper happy, while I kept the actual money flowing and the clients satisfied. The final nail in the coffin arrived in a thick, cream-colored, heavily embossed envelope. The wedding invitation. It sat on my messy, blueprint-covered desk in the shop office, looking completely absurd and out of place among the sawdust and coffee stains. The wedding was going to be an extravagant, wildly expensive affair up in Sedona, set against the stunning backdrop of the Red Rocks. I was asked to be the best man. Despite everything, despite the disrespect, I accepted. I went to the tedious fittings, I rented the expensive tuxedo. I spent weeks writing a heartfelt, funny speech. I actually wanted my brother to be happy. I thought that maybe marriage would finally settle him down and make him a man. I thought the worst part of that weekend would be dealing with Harper's condescending, snobba family members at the rehearsal dinner. I had absolutely no idea I was walking blindly into a calculated execution. If I had known what was waiting for me on that patio, I would have burned the tuxedo. The wedding reception was held at a 5-star luxury lodge with massive floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a deep, breathtaking canyon. The open bar flowed endlessly with top-shelf liquor, and a 12-piece live band played smooth jazz in the corner. The elaborate floral arrangements alone probably cost more than what my lead carpenters made in an entire year of hard labor. I had just finished my best man speech. I stood up there, in front of 200 wealthy guests, and told funny, warm stories about growing up with Julian. I talked about loyalty, about family bonds being thicker than water. I raised my crystal glass and wished him and Harper a lifetime of prosperity, health, and joy. I meant every single word. I was trying to be the bigger person. About an hour later, the band took a short break. The grand room was buzzing with loud laughter, the clinking of expensive glasses, and the low hum of rich people discussing their stock portfolios and HOA meetings. I was standing near the bar with my girlfriend, Clara. Clara is the only reason I survived the last year with my sanity intact. She is a pediatric nurse, grounded, brilliant, fiercely loyal, and she sees right through my family's toxic dynamics without ever judging me for them. My father approached us and tapped me firmly on the shoulder. He had a strange, incredibly tight look on his face. The exact kind of look a man gets when he is about to do something he knows deep down is morally reprehensible, but has convinced himself is absolutely necessary for the greater good of his own ego. "Harrison," Victor said, his voice clipped and barely audible over the crowd. "Come out to the patio for a minute. Julian and Harper are waiting. I have something highly important to discuss." I gave Clara a reassuring smile, told her I would be right back, and followed my father through the heavy glass doors out into the cool, crisp night air. The patio was quiet, illuminated by elegant string lights and the soft, golden glow from the reception hall. Julian and Harper were standing by the stone railing. Harper was wearing her custom silk gown, holding a flute of champagne, a predatory, victorious little smile playing aggressively on her lips. Julian looked slightly nervous, shifting his weight from foot to foot, utterly unable to make direct eye contact with me. My father turned to face us. The silence on that patio was so absolute, so heavy, it felt like a physical weight pressing down violently on my chest, crushing my lungs. The muffled sounds of the jazz band bleeding through the glass doors suddenly sounded a million miles away, like I was underwater. I stared at the thick envelope in Julian's hands. I looked at the bold signature on the front page, stamped aggressively by a notary. It was a legally binding, completely irreversible transfer of wealth. "What?" The word slipped out of my mouth before my brain could stop it. My voice did not sound angry. It sounded completely hollow, like someone else was speaking through my vocal cords. Victor finally looked at me. His eyes were cold, deeply defensive, fully prepared for a massive argument. He had clearly rehearsed this speech in the bathroom mirror 100 times. "Harrison, this is about giving Julian a foundation," Victor said firmly, puffing out his chest. "You have always been solid. You are a survivor. You do not need a hand up from anyone. You can make it anywhere. Julian needs this. He needs something to anchor him, to build his new life with Harper, to establish himself in their new social circle. He needs the respect that comes with ownership. Harper took a slow, deliberate sip of her champagne, her eyes gleaming with utter, malicious triumph. She had orchestrated this entire thing. I could see it as clearly as day. She had whispered in my mother's ear, threatening that Julian would never be a suitable husband, that the marriage might not happen, unless he had real, tangible wealth and a prestigious corporate title. And my weak, pathetic, image-obsessed parents had caved to secure their golden boy's marriage to high society. I built that business, I said, keeping my voice dangerously low, my fists clenching so hard at my sides my nails dug into my palms. I tripled the revenue. I hired every single guy on that crew. I secured every major commercial contract. You just handed away my entire life. Do not be dramatic, Victor snapped, his tone turning incredibly nasty and dismissive. You will still have your job. You will still be the lead foreman on the floor. You will just be working with your brother now. It is not about titles, Harrison. It is about family. You will get a good salary, maybe a bonus at the end of the year if the margins are good. I looked at Julian, my own brother, the man I had just stood up and toasted in front of 200 people. He stepped forward and put a patronizing, heavy hand on my shoulder. Bro, nothing changes, Julian said smoothly, flashing that empty, soulless salesman smile that he used on everyone. You are the backbone of the place. I am just going to handle the executive business side, deal with the high-level corporate strategy. You keep doing your thing in the back with the tools. We are going to take this to the next level together. He was looking at me like I was a rented mule, like my entire existence, my passion, my highly technical skills, were just a utility designed solely for his personal success. I did not scream. I did not throw a violent punch, even though every single muscle in my body wanted to shatter his jaw. I did not flip a cocktail table or cause a massive, embarrassing scene at the wedding. Women like Harper feed on public drama. They use it to paint themselves as innocent victims. Weak men like Victor use other people's explosive anger to justify their own guilt. I was not going to give them the immense, sickening satisfaction of calling me the unhinged, jealous, crazy brother who ruined the wedding. I looked at the three of them. I let the horrific silence stretch until they all started to physically shift and look deeply uncomfortable. Okay, I said softly. I turned around, walked calmly back through the glass doors, walked straight to Clara, and told her we were leaving immediately. We drove the 2 long hours back home in complete silence. Clara did not ask a single question. She did not push me to talk about my feelings. She just held my hand tightly across the center console while I stared blankly at the dark highway, plotting my next move. The next morning, it was Sunday. I woke up at 4:30, purely out of habit. I drove to the shop. It was pitch black and completely silent. I unlocked the heavy doors for the very last time. I spent 3 hours methodically packing up every single piece of personal equipment I owned. I had invested over $15,000 of my own hard-earned money into specialized tools over the years. Custom chisels my grandfather gave me, a high-end Festal router set, laser measuring instruments, premium clamps, specialized drill presses. It was all mine, paid for with my own debit card. I loaded it all into the bed of my truck. Then, I walked into the main office. I took my set of master keys, set them gently on the center of the dusty desk, took out a Sharpie, and wrote a sticky note. Good luck. I walked out and locked the door behind me. I sat in my truck and dialed Desmond. Desmond is one of my oldest friends, and more importantly, a ruthless, brilliant business lawyer who specializes in vicious corporate disputes. I woke him up, but when he heard the dead tone of my voice, he went completely silent and listened intently. I explained the transfer of ownership. I explained what I did. I laid out every painful detail. Harrison, Desmond said, his voice crackling over the speakerphone, suddenly very alert and professional. Did you ever sign an employment contract? A non-compete clause? A non-disclosure agreement regarding your modular designs? Never, I said. Victor was strictly old school. a handshake and a weekly printed paycheck. He thought legal paperwork was an absolute insult to family trust. Desmond let out a sharp, dark, beautiful laugh. Then you are a ghost, my friend. You own your knowledge. You own your relationships with those suppliers. They have the physical building and the heavy machinery, but they have absolutely no legal hold on you or your brain. You are completely free to walk away and take the entire industry with you. I hung up the phone. For the first time in 24 hours, I took a full, deep breath. I had $40,000 in my personal savings account. It was not enough to build a massive factory, but it was enough to rent a small workspace, buy basic materials, and start completely over. On Monday morning, my phone started ringing endlessly. Julian. I ignored it. Victor. Ignored. Sylvia. Ignored. They thought I was throwing a childish tantrum. They genuinely believed I would cool off and come crawling back by Wednesday to collect my paycheck and fall back in line. But by Friday, when they realized I was not coming back, the tone of their voicemails changed drastically from annoyed and condescending to pure, unadulterated panic. The workhorse had broken out of the barn. I thought the separation was clean. I was wrong. The real sabotage was just beginning. Starting a complex manufacturing business from absolute scratch is a brutal, profoundly humbling experience. I went from managing 20 experienced guys and a multi-million-dollar cash flow to being a solo, one-man show working out of a damp, poorly lit warehouse. I spent my days building sample cabinets, sweeping my own concrete floors, and surviving on cheap diner food and black coffee. Clara was an absolute rock during this agonizing time. She started picking up extra grueling night shifts at the hospital to make sure our mortgage was covered, while I burned through my remaining savings to buy raw lumber and pay for the massive liability insurance required to even bid on commercial jobs. Meanwhile, word on the street about Victor's custom cabinetry, which had been swiftly and pretentiously rebranded by my brother to Julian and Company Design, was traveling fast in the local trades community. And the news was incredibly bad. Julian approached running a highly technical woodworking shop like a Silicon Valley tech bro running a lifestyle brand. On day one, he fired the experienced floor manager to save money on salary. Instead of replacing him with a seasoned carpenter, Julian hired a 22-year-old social media manager. Instead of focusing on joint integrity, material sourcing, and wood finishing, Julian was spending thousands of dollars shooting cinematic, drone-flown Instagram reels of himself standing in the shop, pointing at what he did not know how to cut, wearing designer aprons, and talking to the camera about artisanal aesthetics and brand synergy. But smoke and mirrors only last so long in the brutal, unforgiving world of construction. Within 2 months, the absolute disasters started rolling in. To arbitrarily increase his profit margins and pay for his new luxury lifestyle with Harper, Julian authorized the purchase of low-grade particle board from a cheap overseas supplier, abandoning our premium local vendors. He promised a massive, high-end kitchen installation for a luxury home build. When the cabinets arrived on site, they were fundamentally flawed. The wood was warped from moisture. The finishing peeled off at the slightest touch. The hinges didn't align because the measurements were rushed. The contractor, a tough, seasoned old contact of mine named Rowan, furiously demanded an immediate refund and a complete tear-out. Julian panicked. He dodged Rowan's phone calls for a week, and eventually had Harper's father's expensive legal team send Rowan a threatening cease and desist letter, accusing him of harassment. It was professional suicide. In this town, reputation is currency, and Julian was actively bankrupting the family name. I knew all of this because my old crew members, the ones who were still trapped there trying to pay their bills, were texting me daily updates. And I thought Tobias, the young apprentice I had taken in, was just another innocent refugee fleeing Julian's sinking ship. I had been working late on a rainy Tuesday night, drafting proprietary, highly technical blueprints for a radical new modular cabinetry system I wanted to pitch to commercial developers. It was a design I had been perfecting in my head for years, a system that cut installation time in half, reduced material waste by 20%, without sacrificing a single ounce of custom quality. I left the blueprints meticulously laid out on my drafting table to grab a quick dinner with Clara at a diner down the street. When I came back to the shop unannounced to grab my laptop, The main overhead lights in the office were off, but the sharp, repetitive glow of a smartphone camera flash caught my eye through the interior window. I walked quietly to the office door. Tobias was standing over my drafting table, frantically taking high-resolution photos of my blueprints, page by page, making sure he got every single measurement, angle, and joint specification. I leaned heavily against the doorframe, crossing my arms. I did not yell. I did not rush him. I just watched him for a solid 10 seconds in dead silence until he finally turned around, saw me standing in the shadows, and dropped his phone on the concrete floor in sheer terror. The screen cracked loudly. "Harrison," he stammered, his face instantly draining of all blood, his hands shaking violently. I was just studying the joints, trying to learn the system so I could help out tomorrow on the floor. "Julian sent you, didn't he?" I asked, my voice deadly calm, echoing slightly in the empty warehouse. Tobias started to aggressively deny it, spitting out pathetic excuses, but I walked over, picked up his unlocked phone from the floor, and opened his text messages. Right there on the screen was an active text thread with Julian. Julian was offering to double Tobias's salary and give him a fake foreman title if he could steal my proprietary designs so Julian could pass them off to a furious client to save a failing commercial contract. I gripped the edge of the desk. The betrayal stung, especially from a kid I had personally trained, but it also confirmed something vital. Julian was completely drowning. He had the title, the massive building, and the legacy name, but he had absolutely no talent, no vision, and no way out. He was resorting to theft. "Delete the photos right now," I said quietly, handing him back the cracked phone. "Pack your tools. If I ever see you on my property again, if I ever see my designs built by Julian, I will have Desmond file a corporate espionage lawsuit that will bury you so deep in legal fees you will be paying me out of your social security checks for the rest of your miserable life." Tobias ran out the door without a single word. The next morning, the real storm hit. I went to my primary lumber supplier, Marcus, to pick up a crucial order of premium walnut I desperately needed to build a prototype. Marcus, a guy I had done loyal business with for 6 years, refused to load my truck. He stood on the loading dock, looking deeply uncomfortable, avoiding eye contact entirely. "Sorry, Harrison," Marcus said, shifting his clipboard uncomfortably. "Your mom called me yesterday. She said you were having a severe mental breakdown. She said you stole expensive equipment from the family shop when you left, and that Victor is actively looking into pressing felony charges. I cannot do business with you. My partners won't allow it. It is way too much drama." My own mother, Sylvia, was actively calling my suppliers, assassinating my character, spreading vicious lies, trying to starve me out so I would have no choice but to go bankrupt and come crawling back to save her precious golden boy from total ruin. I got back in my truck. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned stark white. They were not just content with taking my past. They were actively, maliciously trying to destroy my future. I drove straight back to my shop, locked the heavy steel doors, and sat down at my desk. I pulled out a thick file for a woman named Penelope. Penelope was a ruthless, legendary real estate developer in the state. She was currently taking bids for the millwork on a 12-unit luxury townhouse project. It was a massive contract, worth nearly $500,000. It was the exact kind of contract that makes or breaks a company, the kind that elevates a shop from a local contractor to a regional powerhouse. I knew for an absolute fact that Julian was bidding on it, desperately trying to land it to save his collapsing business and appease Harper's demanding family. I spent the next 72 hours completely awake. I built a comprehensive, bulletproof project proposal. I built a physical, miniature-scale model of the kitchen layout using the actual premium walnut Marcus had refused to sell me. I drove 3 hours to a different city in the middle of the night to buy it from a competitor with cash. I documented my entire quality control process, detailed my independent, verified supply chain, and attached sworn letters of recommendation from high-profile contractors who had recently abandoned Julian's shop due to sheer incompetence. I was not just going to beat my brother in a bidding war. I was going to publicly, methodically dismantle him. The final presentation was scheduled for Friday morning at Penelope's imposing corporate headquarters downtown. I put on a tailored suit, picked up my heavy presentation case, and walked confidently into the glass-walled building. When I stepped off the elevator and approached the executive boardroom, I stopped dead in my tracks. Sitting in the waiting area, looking panicked, sweating profusely through a designer suit, was Julian. Next to him was Harper, nervously scrolling on her phone, her usual arrogance replaced by tense, raw anxiety. And sitting across from them, looking pale, aged, and utterly exhausted, was my father, Victor. They had brought the whole family to beg for the contract. Julian looked up and saw me. His eyes widened in absolute shock. The receptionist picked up her phone, smiled professionally, and called my name. "Mr. Harrison? Penelope will see all of you now." I gripped my briefcase, looked my father dead in the eye, and stepped into the room. The real war was about to begin, and I brought all the ammunition. The drive to Penelope's corporate headquarters felt like the longest commute of my entire life. I had my heavy, reinforced presentation case sitting on the passenger seat of my Ford F-150. Inside that case was the physical culmination of 3 completely sleepless nights, countless cups of black coffee, and 8 years of hard-won, grueling industry experience. I navigated through the morning city traffic, my hands gripping the steering wheel firmly. I was not nervous. I was not anxious. I was vibrating with a cold, focused energy. I had spent my entire adult life building a legacy for a family that threw me away the second a shiny new opportunity presented itself. Today was the day I stopped building for them and started building a fortress for myself. Penelope's real estate development firm was located in the most expensive commercial district in the city. The building was a towering structure of glass and steel, an architectural masterpiece that screamed wealth and absolute authority. I parked my truck in the underground garage, grabbed my heavy case, and walked to the elevator banks. I rode up to the 50th floor. The doors slid open to reveal a massive reception area featuring imported marble floors, minimalist leather furniture, and a panoramic view of the sprawling city skyline. I walked up to the polished mahogany reception desk. Before I could even state my name, I saw them. Sitting in the waiting area, huddled together like survivors of a shipwreck, was my family. Julian was pacing back and forth, sweating profusely through his expensive, tailored suit, frantically swiping at the screen of his silver iPad. Harper was sitting on a white leather sofa, her legs crossed tightly, aggressively clicking her designer heels against the marble floor. She was wearing a dress that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage, but the tension in her jaw made her look incredibly fragile. And sitting completely still in a corner chair was my father, Victor. Victor looked terrible. He looked like he had aged 10 years in the 8 months since the wedding. His skin was gray, his shoulders were slumped, and he was staring blankly at the floor. The proud, stubborn patriarch who had confidently handed away my inheritance on a patio was completely gone. In his place was a terrified old man watching his legacy crumble to dust. Julian looked up and saw me, the color completely drained from his face. He stopped pacing abruptly, nearly dropping his iPad. Harper stopped clicking her heels, her eyes narrowing into dangerous slits. Victor slowly lifted his head, and when his eyes met mine, I saw a flash of profound shame and sheer panic. They had brought the entire family unit to desperately beg for this contract. They needed this massive influx of cash to save their sinking ship, and they had absolutely no idea I was the iceberg waiting in the water. The receptionist answered her phone, nodded politely, and looked up at the 4 of us. "Penelope will see all of you now in the main boardroom," she announced smoothly. I did not say a single word to my family. I tightened my grip on my presentation case, squared my shoulders, and walked past them down the long glass hallway. I could hear Julian's frantic, heavy footsteps right behind me, followed by the sharp click-clack of Harper's heels and the slow, heavy shuffle of my father. The boardroom was a masterclass in corporate intimidation. It was an enormous space enclosed entirely in soundproof glass. The conference table alone was a 20-foot slab of polished, live-edge walnut that was a work of art in itself. Penelope was sitting at the very head of the table. She was a formidable woman in her late 50s, wearing a sharp, structured navy blazer, with her silver hair cropped impeccably short. She had a legendary reputation in the commercial real estate world. She did not build luxury subdivisions by being nice or accommodating. She built her empire by holding everyone to an impossible standard and destroying anyone who wasted her time. Penelope did not even look up from her legal pad when we walked into the room. She simply gestured with her expensive fountain pen toward the row of leather chairs opposite her. "Have a seat," she commanded, her voice smooth, calm, and carrying the heavy weight of a judge about to deliver a sentence. Julian practically scrambled to sit as close to the center of the table as possible. He immediately pulled out his iPad and set it on the table, trying desperately to project an air of relaxed, Silicon Valley confidence. Harper sat right next to him, putting on her best country club smile, the kind of fake smile people use when they are trying to hide their sheer panic. Victor took a seat at the far end of the table, folding his hands together tightly. I chose a seat directly across from Penelope, placed my heavy leather case on the floor right next to my leg, and waited in absolute silence. Penelope finally looked up. Her sharp, calculating eyes darted from Julian to Victor to Harper and then finally to me. She let a long, agonizing, suffocating silence fill the room. I could literally hear Julian's breathing hitching in his chest. "I was under the distinct impression," Penelope began, her tone dangerously even, "that Victor's custom cabinetry, or Julian and Company design as the new corporate letterhead states, was a single, unified family entity. Yet, my receptionist informs me that Mr. Harrison has registered an entirely separate commercial LLC to bid on this exact same project. Project worth $500,000. I do not like internal family drama bleeding into my corporate escrow timelines. Explain yourselves. Right now." Julian jumped on the opportunity immediately, flashing his absolute best, emptiest salesman smile. He leaned forward, trying to command the energy of the massive room. "Penelope, first of all, thank you so much for the opportunity to synergize with your incredible vision today," Julian started, using the exact kind of meaningless corporate buzzwords I knew Penelope absolutely despised. "There is no drama here at all. We are a solid unit. My brother Harrison is simply exploring some independent contracting avenues on his own time. A little side project to stretch his wings. But Julian and Company remains the premier, legacy powerhouse in this region. We have the massive facility, we have the 30-year history, and we have the corporate bandwidth to execute your luxury townhouse project flawlessly." I watched Penelope's eyes narrow slightly. She hated him already. I could tell by the microscopic tightening of her jaw and the way she set her pen down. Victor cleared his throat loudly, trying to inject some of his old-school, patriarchal authority into the room to save his son. "Penelope, we have done honest business in this town for over 3 decades. My boys are just going through a transitional phase with the management restructuring. But the family name is on the line, and we personally guarantee the absolute highest quality for your builds." "Is that so?" Penelope asked, leaning back in her heavy leather chair, steepling her fingers together. "Because in the brutal commercial real estate game, history does not build houses. Competence builds houses. Julian, you asked for this meeting to pitch your bid. The floor is yours. Dazzle me." Julian stood up abruptly, nearly knocking over his heavy leather chair. He walked confidently to the head of the table and connected his iPad to the massive flat-screen monitor mounted on the glass wall. He launched into a presentation that was entirely composed of smoke and mirrors. He showed highly edited drone footage of the warehouse I used to run. He showed stock photos of smiling, attractive models drinking expensive wine in generic, well-lit kitchens. He talked endlessly about artisanal aesthetics, brand alignment, elevated living paradigms, and lifestyle synergy. He spent 20 full minutes talking, and he did not mention a single structural measurement. He did not mention supply chain logistics. He completely ignored the moisture control protocols necessary for working with raw wood in our humid climate. He failed to address the weight-bearing tolerances required for the massive granite islands Penelope had specifically designed for her open-concept townhomes. I just sat there, taking meticulous notes on my yellow legal pad, remaining completely silent. And so, Julian concluded, breathless, wiping a bead of nervous sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. We are prepared to offer you an aggressive, highly competitive bid that undercuts the current market rate by 20%. We want this partnership, Penelope. We are hungry for it. We are ready to elevate your properties. He sat down, looking extremely proud of himself. Harper beamed brightly, reaching under the heavy walnut table to squeeze his hand affectionately. They genuinely thought they had nailed it. They genuinely thought business was just a popularity contest won by whoever had the slickest presentation and the brightest smile. Penelope did not smile. She did not clap. She picked up a thick, red file folder from her pristine desk and opened it slowly. 20% below market rate, Penelope repeated, letting the words hang in the freezing, heavily air-conditioned air of the boardroom. Julian, are you actively aware of the current commodities pricing for premium-grade, kiln-dried walnut? Are you aware that raw lumber costs have spiked 12% in the last quarter alone due to global supply chain shortages? Julian blinked rapidly, his confident, practiced smile instantly faltering. Well, we have strategic vendor relationships that allow us to seamlessly absorb those market fluctuations without compromising our bottom line. You mean Marcus over at Valley Lumber? Penelope shot back instantly, her voice cracking like a whip across the room. Because I had my corporate legal team do a standard financial audit on your company before I agreed to this meeting. It is standard operating procedure for a contract of this immense size to protect my investors. And my audit shows that you have not purchased a single board of premium walnut from Marcus in over 2 full months. In fact, you have been actively sourcing grade D, highly susceptible particle board from an overseas liquidator. Are you planning to install cheap particle board in my luxury, million-dollar townhomes, Julian? The color completely drained from Julian's face. He opened his mouth, but absolutely no words came out. He looked like a fish suffocating on a dry dock. Victor looked up, genuine shock and horror registering on his weathered, lined face. Julian? What is she talking about? Particle board? We do not use that garbage for custom builds. We never have. Harper immediately went on the aggressive defensive, her wealthy girl entitlement completely flaring up. Excuse me, Penelope? Harper snapped, her tone dripping with intense condescension. Julian is the chief executive officer. He makes executive financial decisions to optimize profit margins and secure the company's financial future. That is called smart, modern business. You should know that, being a successful woman in a highly competitive, male-dominated industry. Penelope slowly turned her icy, terrifying gaze directly to Harper. The temperature in the entire room seemed to drop another 10 degrees. I am a woman who built a massive real estate empire entirely from the ground up, Penelope said softly, dangerously. I did not inherit my wealth, and I certainly did not marry into it. Do not ever speak to me about smart business when your husband is sitting in my boardroom actively trying to defraud my company with substandard, dangerous materials. Harper shrank back into her expensive leather chair, her mouth snapping shut as if she had been slapped. Penelope turned her attention back to Julian, who was currently staring at his iPad screen like it was an active bomb about to detonate. Your presentation was a complete, insulting waste of my time, Julian, Penelope stated brutally, closing the red folder. You missed 2 preliminary meetings with my lead site managers last month. You have active litigation pending from Rowan Construction for a botched, completely disastrous installation. You have absolutely no technical knowledge of the complex blueprints my architects provided. You are a salesman selling an empty, rotting box. Victor let out a ragged, painful breath. He looked like he had just been physically struck in the chest. The harsh, undeniable reality of his disastrous decision was finally staring him right in the face in the middle of a corporate boardroom. Penelope then shifted her intense, calculating gaze directly to me. Mr. Harrison, she said, her tone shifting entirely to professional curiosity. You sat there very quietly while your brother dug his own massive grave. I understand from my research that you were the lead foreman and operations manager for 8 years before recently starting your own LLC. Show me exactly why I should not throw you all out of my building right now. I stood up. I didn't rush. I didn't try to smile or charm her. I reached down, popped the heavy brass latches on my presentation case, and pulled out the physical miniature scale model of the complex kitchen layout that I had stayed awake for 3 solid days to meticulously build. I set it gently on the center of the walnut table. It was utterly flawless. Every single joint was perfectly dovetailed. The premium walnut was hand-rubbed with natural oil, highlighting the beautiful, natural grain of the wood. It was a masterpiece in miniature. Then, I reached back into the case and handed Penelope a thick, professionally bound document. "Penelope, I do not have a drone video for you," I said, my voice steady, projecting absolute authority and competence. "I have a 50-page technical schematic. Page 4 outlines my independent, verified supply chain, specifically bypassing overseas liquidators and securing local premium lumber. Page 12 details my proprietary modular installation system, which will save your general contractors 3 full days of expensive labor per unit. Page 20 contains sworn, notarized affidavits from my suppliers guaranteeing material delivery, fully backed by my personal escrow account. I build things that last." Penelope opened the heavy binder. She didn't just skim it to be polite. She actually read the first few pages intently, her sharp eyes scanning the complex CAD drawings, the precise measurement tolerances, and the incredibly detailed logistical flowcharts I had drafted. She looked at the miniature scale model again, reaching out to run her manicured hand over the incredibly smooth, flawless finish of the walnut wood. She appreciated true craftsmanship. She deeply respected the tangible, undeniable proof of hard work. She leaned back in her chair, closed the binder, and steepled her fingers together, looking at the 4 of us. The silence in the room was deafening. Julian was visibly shaking now, his foot tapping a frantic, panicked rhythm against the expensive carpet. Victor was staring blindly at the table, completely hollowed out, a man watching his life's work evaporate. Harper was gripping the armrests of her chair, her knuckles completely white. "In commercial real estate development," Penelope began, her voice carrying the absolute finality of a Supreme Court judge delivering a verdict, "the single biggest financial risk is hiring a contractor who cannot execute under immense pressure. I investigate everyone who bids on my projects. I know exactly what happened to your family business, Victor." Victor's head snapped up violently, his eyes wide with shock. "What do you mean?" "I know that your eldest son, Harrison, was the singular reason your company scaled past doing basic residential repairs," Penelope said, dropping the massive bomb with surgical precision. "I know he tripled your revenue through his own sheer willpower and management. I also know that 8 months ago, you executed a total, unconditional transfer of ownership to Julian. I know that since that exact transfer, you have lost 40% of your active client base, your absolute best craftsmen have quit in disgust, and you are currently bleeding cash at an unsustainable rate." Julian tried to interject, absolute desperation leaking out of every single pore of his body. "Penelope, please, you have to understand, those are just temporary growing pains, a transition period for any major corporate restructuring." "Shut up, Julian," Penelope commanded, not even raising her voice, but the authority was absolute. Julian snapped his mouth shut instantly. Penelope turned her sharp, unforgiving eyes directly to my father. "Victor, you committed the absolute cardinal sin of business. You let emotional weakness and family politics dictate your corporate strategy. You handed the keys to a high-performance sports car to a child who doesn't even know how to drive a stick shift. You threw away a proven, valuable asset to babysit a massive liability. You destroyed your own company." The brutal, unvarnished honesty of her words echoed loudly in the glass boardroom. Victor looked like a man who had just watched his entire life burn to the ground. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a sudden, horrifying realization of the magnitude of his mistake. He had traded solid gold for absolute dirt, and a powerful stranger was calling him out on it in front of the entire world. "Therefore," Penelope continued, picking up her heavy fountain pen. I am making my final decision regarding the $500,000 millwork contract for the luxury townhome development. She slid my thick presentation binder toward her and signed her initials boldly on the front cover. Harrison, the massive contract is yours, Penelope announced clearly. On one strict, absolutely non-negotiable condition. The legal paperwork will explicitly state that Julian and Company, and any individual currently associated with that entity, are strictly barred from setting foot on my construction sites. I am hiring you, Harrison. Your brother's company is completely dead to me. I felt a massive, powerful surge of adrenaline and absolute vindication rush through my veins. 8 agonizing years of being treated like a peasant in my own family. 8 brutal months of struggling in the dark, eating cheap diner food, watching my own mother assassinate my character to my suppliers. All of it culminated in this exact perfect moment. I accept your terms, Penelope, I said, keeping my composure perfectly professional, refusing to gloat. My lawyer will review the final contract drafts by Monday morning. That was the exact moment Harper completely lost her mind. The carefully constructed, polite facade of the wealthy society wife completely shattered into a million jagged pieces. Harper slammed her hands down hard on the walnut table. Her face flushed a deep, angry red with unhinged rage. This is completely ridiculous, Harper screamed, her shrill voice echoing violently off the glass walls. Julian, do something. Speak up. You told me this contract was an absolute lock. You told me we were going to use this cash advance to cover the massive mortgage on the summer house and pay off the credit cards. Julian shrank away from her, looking utterly terrified of his own wife. Harper, please, calm down, people can hear you. We can find other bids, we can pivot. There are no other bids, you useless idiot. Harper shrieked, turning her absolute, venomous fury entirely onto my brother. You have ruined everything. You don't know how to do anything right. You are a complete failure. I cannot believe I forced Victor to give you this stupid, worthless company. The room went entirely, terrifyingly dead. Even Penelope raised a single eyebrow at the outburst. Victor slowly turned his head to look at his daughter-in-law. His voice was barely a whisper, trembling with profound shock and disbelief. What did you just say? Harper, completely blinded by her selfish rage and the sudden, terrifying loss of her luxury lifestyle funding, doubled down. She sneered viciously at my father. Oh, please, Victor. Stop playing the innocent victim. Harper spat, venom dripping from every word. Do you honestly think I was going to marry a guy who worked as a fake freelance consultant out of a local coffee shop? My family would have laughed me out of the country club. I told Sylvia very clearly. Either Julian gets absolute ownership of the legacy company, a real CEO title, and a real asset portfolio, or I am walking away and taking the expensive ring with me. Your precious wife came crying to you in a panic, and you folded like a cheap lawn chair to keep me in the family and secure your golden boy's future. The absolute silence that followed was suffocating. It felt like all the oxygen had been instantly sucked out of the room. The great, unspoken family secret was suddenly dragged out into the harsh, unforgiving fluorescent light of a corporate boardroom. Victor hadn't given Julian the company because he genuinely believed in him. He hadn't done it because he thought Julian was a visionary leader. He did it because a 26-year-old, manipulative gold digger held my mother emotionally hostage, threatening a humiliating breakup. And Victor was too cowardly to stand up to his own wife and daughter-in-law. He threw away my entire life's work, my rightful inheritance, and our relationship, just to appease a manipulative brat and keep the peace in his house. Victor looked at Julian, tears of sheer humiliation and devastating regret pooling in his aging eyes. Julian, you knew about this? You knew she actively blackmailed your mother to steal your brother's company. Julian stared intensely at his expensive Italian shoes, too cowardly and ashamed to even look his broken father in the eye. He didn't say a word. He just swallowed hard. That silence was all the confirmation Victor needed. I looked at the three of them sitting there. A broken, cowardly father, a pathetic, spineless brother, and a vicious, greedy wife turning on each other like starved rats on a rapidly sinking ship. I didn't feel angry anymore. I didn't feel the need to yell or demand an apology. I just felt an overwhelming, profound sense of pity for all of them. They were utterly trapped in a prison of their own making. I picked up my heavy leather presentation case. I buttoned my suit jacket smoothly. "Penelope, thank you for your time, your honesty, and your immense trust," I said, completely ignoring my family as if they were entirely invisible. "I will be in touch with your lead site managers on Monday morning to begin preliminary logistics." "I look forward to it, Harrison," Penelope said, a rare, genuine smile crossing her face. "You earned this." I walked out of the boardroom. I didn't look back a single time. I walked confidently down the long hallway to the elevator, pressed the button for the lobby, and as the heavy steel doors closed, completely blocking out the sound of Harper viciously screaming at Julian, I felt a massive, heavy chain snap completely off my chest. I was entirely free. The fallout from that catastrophic meeting was swift, brutal, and completely absolute. When you build a massive house on a rotting foundation of lies, incompetence, and blackmail, it doesn't just sink slowly into the mud. It collapses all at once, taking everyone inside down with it. Within 3 short weeks of the disaster in Penelope's boardroom, Julian and company completely imploded. Word of what happened, of Penelope utterly humiliating Julian and exposing his use of dangerous, substandard materials, spread through the local commercial real estate network like wildfire. Penelope wielded massive, unquestioned influence in the city, and once other contractors heard that she had publicly banned Julian's company from her sites, every other major developer immediately followed suit. Nobody wants to risk millions of dollars in capital and liability lawsuits on a contractor who has been blacklisted by the absolute queen of the industry. The financial hemorrhaging was catastrophic and entirely unstoppable. Suppliers whom Julian had screwed over to fund his lifestyle, like Marcus, aggressively called in their massive debts, demanding immediate, full payment on net 30 accounts that Julian had been blatantly ignoring for months. Because Victor had legally transferred 100% of the equity and the corporate liabilities to Julian in his foolish attempt to secure the marriage, Julian was personally on the hook for everything. The expensive commercial lease on the massive warehouse I used to run went into immediate default. The heavy machinery, the beautiful CNC routers and pristine table saws I had meticulously maintained for years, were aggressively repossessed by the bank to cover the outstanding business loans. Julian was completely out of options. He was forced to file for Chapter 11 corporate bankruptcy, a humiliating, highly public process that legally stripped him of everything and permanently destroyed his credit. And Harper? Harper did exactly what parasites do when the host organism finally dies. She detached immediately, the exact moment the bankruptcy papers were officially filed in court, exposing to the world that Julian had zero liquid assets and insurmountable, crushing debt. Harper packed her expensive designer bags. She moved back into her parents' heavily guarded, gated estate and immediately filed for divorce. She cited irreconcilable differences in the legal paperwork, but in reality, the only difference was that Julian's bank account no longer matched her extreme financial expectations. She dragged him through a vicious, highly publicized, incredibly expensive divorce settlement, utilizing her family's ruthless lawyers to fight over the absolute scraps of whatever was left of his dignity and pride. During all of this utter chaos, my mother, Sylvia, went completely, utterly silent. The woman who had spent months viciously assassinating my character to my suppliers, the woman who had enabled Harper's disgusting blackmail scheme, the woman who had always treated me like a second-class citizen in my own family, suddenly had absolutely nothing to say. There were no more condescending Thanksgiving dinners. There were no more loud bragging sessions about her brilliant golden boy. She had protected the show pony at the cost of the entire farm, and now they were all starving in the cold. And that brings me right back to where we started at the very beginning of this story. Late on a rainy Tuesday night, sitting in the freezing cold cab of my Ford F-150 outside my thriving new shop, staring blankly at the single voicemail notification from Victor. I knew exactly why he was calling. The thick dust had finally settled on his destroyed legacy. The massive, beautiful business he had spent 30 years slowly building, the business I had hypercharged into a multimillion-dollar machine with my own two hands, was completely gone. Erased from existence. Auctioned off to the highest bidder piece by piece to pay off legal settlements and furious creditors. I hit play on the voicemail again. I listened to the first 3 minutes of agonizing, broken sobbing. I listened to a proud, stubborn, emotionally stunted man finally breaking completely under the massive weight of his own terrible choices. Then, right around the 3-minute and 10-second mark, Victor finally managed to draw a ragged, painful breath and speak into the phone. "Harrison." His voice cracked heavily, sounding 10 years older, completely devoid of his usual commanding, arrogant tone. "I am so sorry, son. I did you wrong. I knew it when I did it on that patio at the wedding, and I did it anyway. Because it was easier. It was easier to give it to Julian because he was the one who needed it to survive, and you were the one who had actually earned it. And I cowardly told myself that was the exact same thing. But it wasn't." He choked on a violent sob, pausing to gasp for air. "You built that business with your own hands and your time and your massive heart," Victor continued, his voice barely a raw, scratchy whisper. "And I gave it away to a spoiled child like it was just mine to give. I threw away your entire life. And all I can think about, every single night when I close my eyes, is the look of complete betrayal on your face on that patio at the wedding. You didn't even argue. You didn't yell at me. You just looked at me, and you left. And that is what is absolutely killing me inside. You didn't argue because you already knew what I was doing was fundamentally evil. And you loved me enough not to make a massive scene at your brother's wedding. I don't deserve that kind of loyalty. I do not deserve a son like you." Another long, agonizing pause filled the recording. More quiet, desperate crying. "Your mother told me about your massive new contract with Penelope?" Victor whispered, sounding entirely defeated. "I drove past your new shop last week in the pouring rain. I didn't stop. I just sat in the parking lot looking at your massive new sign, and I thought about how incredibly proud I should have been of you all these years. How deeply proud I am of you right now. I just didn't know how to say it. I've never been good at this emotional part, Harrison. I failed you as a father. But I need you to know that I see exactly what I did. I see the monster I was. And if you never talk to me again for the rest of my life, I will completely understand. It is what I deserve. But I hope you do." I didn't call him back that night. I didn't call him back the next day, or the next week. Forgiveness is not a magic light switch that you just effortlessly flip on because someone finally feels guilty for destroying your life. You don't just erase the deep trauma and the pain, especially when the thing you are supposed to be forgiving cost you 8 years of your youth and your fundamental faith in the people who were biologically supposed to protect you. I needed to process it completely on my own terms, in my own time. Clara understood perfectly. She didn't push me to reconcile. She didn't offer empty platitudes about family being everything. She just held me and said, "You will know exactly when you are ready to face him, and I will be right here when you do." 3 agonizing weeks after my father left that gut-wrenching voicemail, I finally made my decision. I drove my truck down the familiar, quiet suburban street to my parents' house on a crisp, bright Sunday morning. Clara offered to come with me for moral support, to act as a buffer, but I told her this was a surgical cut I needed to make completely alone. I needed to stand on my own 2 feet in that house. I walked up the long concrete driveway. Same cracked terracotta flower pot by the front porch that my mother always said she was going to replace. Same peeling white paint on the window trim. I didn't go to the front door. I found my dad exactly where I expected him to be, sitting in the detached garage in the backyard. He was sitting heavily on an old wooden stool next to his dusty, abandoned workbench, not doing anything, just staring blankly at the pegboard wall. When he heard my heavy work boots crunch loudly on the gravel and saw me walk into the dimly lit space, he stood up so incredibly fast he almost knocked the heavy stool completely over. "Harrison," Victor breathed out, his eyes wide, looking incredibly fragile and small. "Hey, Dad," I said, keeping my voice entirely neutral, my posture firm and unyielding. Silence stretched heavily between us. The garage smelled intensely like old motor oil and stale sawdust, the exact same comforting way it always had since I was a little kid learning how to hold a hammer. "I got your long voicemail," I said, breaking the heavy, suffocating tension in the room. He nodded slowly, his jaw tight. He was actively trying to hold it together, terrified of saying the wrong thing and scaring me off forever. "I am not going to stand here and pretend that everything is suddenly fine between us," I stated clearly, looking him directly in his tired eyes. "It is not fine. What you did hurt me in a fundamental, deeply traumatic way that I don't even have a complete vocabulary for yet. You took the exact thing I had given my blood, my sweat, and my youth to, and you handed it to someone else without even having a single conversation with me. At my brother's wedding, in front of a crowd of strangers, like my entire existence was just a disposable footnote in Julian's life story." He started to open his mouth to apologize again, a look of sheer desperation on his face, but I held up my hand, stopping him instantly. "Let me finish, Victor. You spent 8 years watching me build that business from the ground up, and when it came time to decide its future, you cowardly chose the son who needed a vanity project over the son who had proven, with blood and sweat, that he could actually run it. And the worst part wasn't that you chose Julian. The absolute worst part was that you let a 26-year-old girl blackmail you into doing it, and you didn't even have the spine to defend me to your own wife." Tears were silently running down his weathered, lined face. He didn't wipe them away. He didn't offer any excuses. He just stood there and took the absolute, brutal truth like a man finally facing his executioner. "But here is the other thing," I said, my voice softening just a microscopic fraction. "I listened to your voicemail about 30 times. And I know that the pain and the regret in your voice was real, because Hank Harrison does not cry for anyone. So those 4 minutes of weeping told me more than any planned speech ever could." He let out a shaky, rattling breath that sounded like it had been trapped in his chest for an entire year. "I am not going to hold this massive failure over your head forever," I said firmly, establishing the new rules of our reality. "I am not going to bring it up at every single holiday or use it as emotional ammunition to hurt you, but I need you to completely understand that things are entirely, permanently different now. I have my own business. It is thriving. I built it from absolute zero without a single dollar of your money, and I am fiercely proud of it. And I need you to be proud of it, too. Not of Julian's fake version of me. Not of what you wish I had done. Of what I actually did. But hear me clearly, Dad. We will never work together again. That bridge is permanently burned to ash. I am your son, but I am not your employee, and I am not your backup plan." My dad walked slowly across the dusty garage floor, and he hugged me. Not a quick, manly pat on the back. He wrapped his arms tightly around me and held on to me like he was terrified I would physically disappear into thin air. He buried his face in my shoulder and whispered, "I am so proud of you, Harrison. I've always been proud of you. I was just too stupid, too weak, and too stubborn to protect you from your mother and myself." I let him hold on, and for the first time in over a year, I hugged him back. It wasn't a magical fairy tale ending where all the trauma instantly vanished, but it was a solid, honest foundation. It was a start. A few weeks later, an incredibly unexpected thing happened. Julian called me. He asked if we could meet for a quick cup of coffee at a diner on the edge of town. When I walked in, Julian looked completely different. The slick, arrogant salesman facade was completely gone. He was wearing normal jeans and a plain t-shirt, looking incredibly tired but weirdly relieved. We sat in a vinyl booth, nursing black coffees. "I owe you a massive apology, Harrison," Julian said quietly, staring intensely into his mug. "Not just for taking the business, but for what I did to it. And for sending Tobias to steal your designs. I was desperate, man. I was suffocating." I nodded slowly. "You were in way over your head, Julian. The absolute truth is..." Julian paused, taking a deep, shaky breath. "I always absolutely hated woodworking. I hated the dust, I hated the early hours, I hated the massive stress of managing people. I never wanted that company." I looked at him, stunned. Then why did you take it? Why did you fight so hard to keep it? Julian let out a bitter, self-deprecating laugh. Because of Harper. Because of Mom. Because I spent my entire life performing this fake, exhausting confidence to cover up the fact that I knew, deep down, I was living in your massive shadow. I knew I couldn't do the hard work you did. Taking the title of CEO was the only way I could feel like I had finally won their approval. But the pressure, Harrison, the pressure of trying to pretend I knew what I was doing while the financial walls were caving in, it was eating me alive. I sabotaged those contracts because I panicked. I wanted the status, but I was terrified of the actual work. Losing the company was the most humiliating thing that ever happened to me. But honestly, it was also the biggest relief of my entire life. That confession completely knocked the wind out of me. It had never once occurred to me that Julian felt overlooked in his own way, trapped in a golden cage of family expectations he could never actually meet. My dad gave Julian the business not because he was genuinely proud of him, but because he was terrified for him. "What are you doing now?" I asked. "I'm working as a junior agent at a mid-level commercial real estate firm," Julian said, a genuine, small smile appearing on his face. "I'm starting at the absolute bottom. No fake CEO titles. No Harper breathing down my neck demanding a bigger house. I just make cold calls and show office spaces. And honestly, bro, I actually kind of love it." I paid for the coffee, shook my brother's hand firmly, and wished him genuine luck. We were a messed up, broken family, but honestly, what family isn't? That was 6 months ago. Today, Harrison Custom Millwork is an absolute powerhouse in the region. We finished the first phase of Penelope's massive luxury townhouse project 2 full weeks ahead of schedule, completely under budget, and she has already locked me in for her next 3 commercial developments. I now have a dedicated, highly paid team of 15 incredible craftsmen. Tobias is not one of them. Clara and I finally bought a house. It is a beautiful, sprawling mid-century modern home with a massive backyard. We converted the detached garage into a stunning pottery studio for her, and she spends her weekends covered in clay, completely at peace. We are getting married next spring. I am Harrison. I am 34 years old. I am the absolute master of my own fate, and I am exactly where I am supposed to be. Have you ever faced something similar with your own family? Have you ever had to draw a hard line in the sand to protect your own peace and build your own worth? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next journey.